This is why I wanted to have this conversation. This is why it interested me so much, because some people might have already given up listening because they're like, well, I want to hear about Bitcoin. But this really interests me because this has come up recently. So I got into a Twitter discussion with somebody about the state. I am a reluctant statist. I believe in democracy. I support democracy. I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. I'm not a libertarian. I like a lot of the ideas they have. But every time I game it out and try and imagine society organizing around these rules, it just doesn't work for me. And it came up on Twitter, and somebody said to me, let's start with first principles. Do you agree that all coercion is bad? Which is a very tricky question to deal with, because if I say yes, then by that I should therefore be against the state, because the state will tax you under the threat of weapons. And if I say no, well, therefore I'm somebody who believes in coercion, I'm fundamentally evil. Those arguments that start from a point of a very simple first principle, they don't allow you to deal with the nuance. So, for example, of course I have to pay tax in the UK. I'm okay paying tax. I think it's too high. I wish it was lower. I do wish it was lower. I would like it to be a lot lower.
I sympathize. Having grown up in Belgium, I sympathize.
So you understand. But I'm still okay paying tax. And whilst you can define it as being tax is theft and you have to pay it under the threat of men with guns, I don't feel like there is a threat of men with guns. I just accept that as part of how a society coordinates itself. But the reason I'm interested in this is because of these kind of arguments, because I think they destroy nuance. And I think nuance is super important. When we make a show tour, it doesn't matter what it is, whether we cover Russia, Ukraine, or we covered COVID, or we cover the state, or we cover climate change, or Bitcoin subjects or asymmetric subjects, I can guarantee you that there are three audiences listening. There's the audience that will disagree and never going to change their mind, the audience that will agree and never will change their mind, and then a group in the middle who are willing to hear open arguments. But my problem is when you get to the audience who disagree or agree, one or the other, who won't change their mind, is that they're unempathetic for other people's ideas, and they will repeat talking points they hear from other people. So a great example will be tomorrow. And this isn't an advanced criticism of Alex Epstein. We've got an interview with him. He's written a book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. I'm not saying he's a cult leader. I think he has made some interesting points. I do think those people concerned about the climate have got some issues wrong. The point I'm trying to make is people who have become convinced and are immovable from the point that climate change is a scam will believe everything he says and repeat everything he says without thinking it through. That works vice versa. Those who are highly concerned about the climate will read everything by a climate scientist and repeat it verbatim without challenging it. And we seem to have lost this ability, or some people have lost this ability to think through the idea and accept they may be wrong and end up following the opinions of somebody. And I think that's dangerous. Yeah. I think people have become their ideas, which is dangerous.
I think it's understandable, but dangerous. Like, I think usually it comes from, you feel unsafe, you feel fear, and then it becomes like a shield. Like you join a tribe and, you're kind of hiding behind their shield, and you can just follow them, and they'll protect you and they'll value you. And so, yeah, it's like, joining a team is fun, and like even in a company, and like you're competing, and like or in sports, like cheering for a certain team is fun, but you can't do it everywhere. Like you like in life as an adult, like there is nuance and there is disagreement, and it's hard to stand on your own legs, right? To be like, hey, I actually don't fully agree with any human on the planet. Right? I mean, it's kind of tough to realize, to kind of grow into that and be like, yeah, I'm just my own person. And, but then I think that what's the the beauty is if you can get to a point where it's like, oh, but that doesn't mean I can't connect with other people. Like we can sit at the table and talk and then be like, oh, he has a different idea about this. Oh, let me think about that. Maybe now I'll disagree, and then later, So, yeah, I agree. It doesn't even matter what camp people are in. I think the scary thing is if people are just tribalists. If people, and to kind of come back to the non-aggression principle. To somebody who's impressionable, that is a compelling argument, but the nuance I think can come where it's like, okay, well, let's make it because the example given is always like, oh, let's imagine Robinson Crusoe on an island, right? And then Friday arrives, number 2, and then you have like, what to say if you have 5 people there, and then 3 people gang up against the 2 others and force them to pay tax. That's like so it's like the argument that tax and slavery are just like the 2 sides of one coin. There's another, and this is just off the top of my head, but there's another model which is possible to think about, which is they call it the hotel model in like libertarian circles or Austrian circles, and the idea is basically like if you live in an apartment building or like some kind of organization where people live together, you want to make decisions, and so you have meetings sometimes, and so there, of course, you have your own freedom inside your apartment, but there are certain kind of places where there is some friction and where you talk and you try to figure out, and of course an apartment building is going to charge for maintaining the lawn and this and that. So I'm not saying I agree with that and that's the model that we should extrapolate, and that the social contract is therefore Rousseau is 100% right, and I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying like there is another way to look at this stuff, which is not necessarily like retarded or evil, or it's a fair argument.
Well, the non-aggression principle works if everyone abides by the non-aggression principle and their life circumstances allow them to abide by it, and we don't have people who are maybe violent or psychopaths or desperate who for some reason have to break that principle. I mean, if someone is hungry and they don't have food, if they steal an apple from a cart, have they broken the non-aggression principle?
Yeah.
So I tend to think these binary black and white positions, which you mentioned earlier, they don't really allow for understanding of what humans are like. And when humans are desperate and hungry, they will fight and they will defend themselves and they will steal. That happens. So I believe you have to have a way of coordinating around rules. And if you're going to have rules, they're really going to end up being centralized, so you have a way of enforcing them. Now, that doesn't mean I support the extension of where the state is now. We've gone too far. Things have got a bit crazy. But I think it's important to start thinking of, rather than looking at a binary decision, start looking at the net position of both. If you want a libertarian society, what is the net position on everybody? And if you want government, also what is the net position?
What does that mean, net
the
position?
The net position. So, for example, we live in a democracy now and we pay high tax. But if, you can maybe have a number of different measures, economic output, standard of living, how content people are. If you went to a libertarian society, you would lose some things. So what would you maybe lose? Okay, you would lose taxation, so you have more money, but you would have to arrange your own cover for in case you have a fire, or if you need support from the police or medical cover. Okay, what about people who can't afford that? Does it ghettoize certain areas? And with that, does it make a more dangerous society? Like, what is the net impact of these decisions? And I think that's where the debate is. And I think if you start to understand the net impact, you don't really want democracy in its current form. You don't really want a libertarian society. You want something in the middle.
Yeah, I don't know. And I even wonder if, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but one of the areas that I think is understood and underappreciated is the area of the production of law. And with law, I don't mean lex, right? I don't mean rules that come from some authority. I don't mean fiat, right? What I mean is order. How does order get produced in society? And if you look historically, well, it's a lot of it is mediation. A lot of it is sitting across from a person you don't agree with and trying to work something out. A lot of it is maybe even just talking about contractual terms like prevention, right? An ounce of prevention. And pre-agreeing, like how are we going to mediate this if we run into a conflict, and historically it helps if people have been living in the same area for a long period of time to kind of have a consensus, not about individual like life choices, but about the meta stuff. Like, what if we disagree? What do we do? Do we like bash each other's head in, or do we like sit around the table? And then if we do sit around the table, how does that work? And so I think part of why we kind of have grasped on to this idea of the state, that the state must take care of it, is that, and I could very much be wrong, is that there's been so much change has happened over the past few centuries, like so much technological change, so much migration, and so what do you do when there's an influx of people with very different programming? Well, it's tempting to be like, well, maybe this one organization can do a great job, but I do think in the long run there can be a lot of unbundling where we, ultimately the state is just a corporation, right? It's just a corporation that has some privileges and some monopolies, and I think a lot, if not all of that, can be unbundled and doesn't have to be so geographically, bounded. Like, if I rent a car with Avis, maybe their headquarters are somewhere in the U.S., but I can be in Europe, and still I can rely on, on their way of doing things, their lawful way of doing things. And historically, there was mercantile law, which is also not bound to geography. It was just the oceans. So that to me is, and of course, the role of technology is to make the realm of where we even have to have these debates, to shrink that. Because if we use Bitcoin, there's not even a debate about how much money there needs to be printed. It just is. We can just there's all that energy about like monitoring the Fed. We can just like not do that and debating each other and trying to get elected to make change. It's just a given. It's just technology takes care of it, so we can focus on our own private lives and getting along. And so that to me is what excites me. It's like I'm into tech because it shrinks the area of potential conflict. And I do think that governments can play a role in shrinking that area of potential conflicts. But I think there are other ways to do, there's ways to shrink the government almost completely. And I do also think that there is, like, this is something that I think in general Brits, and I don't mean it as like a kind of an attack or something, but I think maybe because of the kind of, I don't know, like Jeremy Bentham and like this kind of background of like scientism and like empiricism, there can be a tendency to like have this consequentialist thinking where it's like something is good if the consequences are good. The end. If we reach the end, then that justifies the means, and to me, that is kind of dangerous.